Good evening and welcome to Township Future Speaker Series. We welcome you to the next installment of our speaker series, where tonight we will be talking about the Woodlands Township governmental structure, a success story, presented by Walter Cook. Walter Cook and his family moved to the Woodlands in 1990, and during his tenure here, he served on the Woodlands Association Board of Directors, Woodlands Community Association Board of Directors, which was one of the governing bodies that was in the Woodlands prior to the Woodlands Township Board of Directors. Walter was recognized as a hometown hero in 2005. He is a practicing attorney today in the Woodlands and once represented the Town Center Improvement District. Currently, Walter serves on our steering committee of Township Future, and we appreciate Walter taking the time to present this very valuable information to you tonight. So Walter, without any further ado, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate the introduction. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Woodlands Township governmental structure, a success story. This is not an anti or pro-incorporation presentation. What we're trying to do tonight is to explain our current governmental structure, which is not a simple structure you can show on a simple flow chart, as you will see. As Ted mentioned, I moved to the Woodlands in 1990 with my wife and 3 kids that have practiced law in Houston and the Woodlands ever since. And during my practice in the Woodlands, had some opportunity to learn a lot about the governmental structure of the Woodlands. As Ted mentioned, I served on the board of the Woodlands Community Association. I also represented the Woodlands Association for a number of years. Plus, I represented the Town Center Improvement District, the predecessor of the Woodlands Township. And in fact, I represented the Woodlands Township for a bit when it first got started. So I have some familiarity with the governmental structure of the Woodlands. And so without further ado, let's get on with the show. If you've ever wondered what the Woodlands Township looks like, here's a little map that shows the boundaries of the township. We're about 28,000 acres in Montgomery and Harris County. If you're really into maps, here's the official Woodlands Township boundary map with streets off the township website. You can see the big green park area here, which is Spring Creek, the dividing line between the Woodlands Township in Montgomery County and the Woodlands Township in Harris County. You might be able to pick out Woodlands Parkway and Lake Woodlands Drive. But that is a graphic representation of what the Woodlands Township looks like on the ground. It's jurisdictional boundaries. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the governmental structure, I think it's worthwhile to kind of take a step back and look at the Woodlands Township from a 30,000 foot level. You know, when you go to Austin, go to Dallas, go to Fort Worth, go to San Antonio, you know, you might be entranced by the charms of those cities. And, you know, the grass is always greener. So let's look at the Woodlands Township. If we were a visitor from Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, Corpus Christi, we were visiting the Woodlands Township, what would we find out? Well, we would find out the township is 28,500 acres in size. It's got about 119,000 residents. And you note in 1980, there were only about 8,500 people living here. So a tremendous amount of growth in a short period of time. The township has about 2,140 employers. Whoops, excuse me. Lost mine. And amazingly, we have about 66,000 employees in the Woodlands. That's people working in the Woodlands. There's 36.2 million square feet of non-residential buildings, 34,760 homes, 9,350 apartments and assisted living facilities, 3,800 attached homes. And here's something pretty incredible. $23 billion in total assessed value of residential and non-residential structures. We've got 148 parks, 7,665 acres of open space, forest preserves, golf course, 220 miles of pathways, 493 miles of roads, 41 religious congregations, 23 public schools, and 10 private schools. That's an impressive array of achievement for the Woodlands Township in a very short period of time, considering in 1974, the township, or then the Woodlands, was officially opened. And before that, it was nothing more than a pine forest in South Montgomery County. So I think we can all, pat ourselves on the back about the great achievements of the place we live, the Woodlands Township. Now this year, 2021, the township began to get the recognition that it really deserves. This outfit called Niche, which surveyed 228 cities and 18,516 towns and neighborhoods. Out of all those cities and neighborhoods, the Niche found that the Woodlands was the #1 best city to live. #2 best city to buy a house, also #2 best city to raise a family, city with best public schools #6, and best city to retire #7. Again, an impressive array of excellent statistics for the Woodlands. Now, you note I put cities in quotes because, as we're going to discover in this presentation, the Woodlands is not an incorporated city. So what the heck is the Woodlands Township if it's not an incorporated city? Well, the Woodlands Township is what's called a special purpose district. These special purpose districts are created by the Texas legislature to provide one or more services. As mentioned, this district, which we call the Woodlands Township, is located in unincorporated areas of Montgomery County and Harris County. And unincorporated areas are simply areas outside the city limits of incorporated municipalities. The Woodlands is within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Houston, and Spring Creek is the dividing line between Montgomery County to the north and Harris County to the south of Spring Creek. So what is a special purpose district? There are 3 local types of government in Texas: counties, municipalities, also known as cities, and special purpose districts. It was interesting to find out that under Spanish and Mexican law, our state was divided into 23 municipalities, 23 giant cities, I guess. And when Texas got its independence and became the Republic of Texas in 1836, the legislature turned the 23 municipalities into counties. And now we have 254 counties in Texas. And counties basically provide municipal type services, principally law enforcement, the land not included within the city limits of a municipality. Now, special purpose district has been called the most basic form of local government. And these districts are created by the legislature. Each one has its own set of statutes which create the district and give the district its powers. So it has limited powers. If you want to know whether or not a district can do something, then you got to go to the legislation and read it and see if the legislature has given the district the power to do whatever you want it to do. Now, special districts are not unique to Texas. The first one that I was able to find anything about was the English 1552 Statute of Sewers, which I assume had something to do with providing London or some other part of England with sewage treatment facilities, maybe just sewers to run off into a river. Every state has special districts. Illinois, interestingly, has the most special purpose districts, and California comes in #2. So Texas is not even among the first 2 in terms of the number of special purpose districts. I did a little research to see if there were any other large communities like the Woodlands, which was not an incorporated municipality, and found that the Villages, Florida's friendliest hometown, is not an incorporated municipality. I'm sure you've seen the ads for the Villages. It's a big age-restricted community stretched out over 3 Florida counties. Its population is about 122,000 people. As mentioned, it's not a city, it's not incorporated. And it has 17 special purpose districts which provide services in the Villages, things like fire protection, recreation, sanitation, water, and wastewater. So there you have a community, at least population-wise, about the same size as the Woodlands. It functions quite well without being an incorporated municipality. You also may be familiar with Columbia, Maryland. Back in the late 60s, there was a big push by Housing and Urban Development to establish new towns, they were called. And HUD guaranteed loans to developers who would create these new towns. The new towns included Columbia, Maryland, and then there was Reston, Virginia, and the Woodlands was one of the new towns. And there were several others throughout the United States, but the whole idea was to provide money to create new cities where people could live and go to work and cut down on some of the commuting from outlying suburbs into downtown metropolitan areas. And Columbia, Maryland was one of those new towns. It's still here. It's in Howard County, Maryland, opened in 1967. And it covers about 20,480 acres, population about 110,000 people. It's not incorporated. Instead, it's governed by the Columbia Association, which is a property owners association with a board elected by residents. So there were 2 examples of large communities that are not incorporated and instead provide municipal type services through the use of special purpose districts and property owners association. Our first presentation in this series was a talk on Mr. Mitchell and his relationship to the Woodlands. So if you went to that presentation, you'll remember that October 19, 1974 was the grand opening of the Woodlands. As mentioned, it's in unincorporated areas of Montgomery and Harris County and within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Houston. Now, Mr. Mitchell's vision was that, his company, then known as the Woodlands Corporation, would develop the Woodlands, sell lots and commercial properties with minimal interference from governmental bodies. And then after the Woodlands was fully developed, all the houses sold, all the commercial property sold, then the Woodlands would be annexed by the city of Houston. That was his original vision, but probably not the vision of most people in the Woodlands these days with respect to annexation by Houston. So we did have governance. Our initial governance structure were 3 property owners associations. They were all created by the Woodlands Corporation. You had the Woodlands Community Association, Inc., Texas nonprofit corporation, formed in 1986 that covered the villages indicated in this slide. Then you had the Woodlands Association, Inc., a second Texas nonprofit corporation formed in 1992 that covered the various villages shown on this slide. And then the third property owners association was the Woodlands Commercial Owners Association, Inc., formed in 1992 that covered all the commercial properties. And accompanying the creation of these 3 property owners associations was the imposition of what we call the Woodlands Covenants on land in the Woodlands. The Woodlands Covenants is actually 3 separate sets of covenants one for each of the lands covered by the 3 property owners associations, which were recorded in the deed records before any land was sold. And if you'll remember, if you were back with us in the Woodlands during the days of the community associations, you had to pay an assessment to finance the operations of the properties owners associations. This is in the covenants. The covenants also created the Development Review Committee, the Development Standards Committee, and the Community Standards Committee. And they're basically architectural control committees and are now collectively referred to as the Plan Review Committees. And the covenants gave these Plan Review Committees the authority and power to adopt standards, building standards, landscape standards, and other similar standards. And so we have today 2 sets of standards, the Woodlands Residential Development Standards and the Woodlands Commercial Planning and Design Standards. And the covenants authorize the boards of directors of these 3 property owners association to enforce the covenants. Now, originally, the Woodlands Corporation appointed the members of the boards of directors, but over time, more and more board members were elected by the people who live within the jurisdictional area of each association, so that by 2007 or so, all of the associations, as I recall, were governed by a popularly elected board. And then these 3 associations, in order to have a staff to provide services like Parks and Rec and Covenant Administration, formed another Texas nonprofit corporation called the Woodlands Community Service Corporation. And it was that corporation that had all the employees to do what needed to be done to provide services to the residents of the 3 property owners associations. And those services were covenant administration, as we discussed, neighborhood services, past parkway recreation and aquatics. The Woodlands Community Service Corporation, through its staff, took care of maintaining all our parks and pools. The community associations provided us with a fire department, which is yet another Texas nonprofit corporation called the Woodlands Fire Department, Inc. Then through contracts with waste management, we had garbage. The community associations provided us with garbage, recycling services, and environmental education. And then the associations provided us with law enforcement through a contract with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, that we'll talk about a little later. So in the area of the community associations, this was the menu of services that these associations provided, and we financed all of this through assessments based on the value of our property. The next event in the development of the Woodlands Township was the creation of the Town Center Improvement District in 1993. Now, this was another special purpose district, and it really covered just the downtown area of the Woodlands. And its purpose was to promote economic development and public welfare in the town center area. So it was a special purpose district with a very restricted function. Originally had an 11-person board that was selected by the Woodlands Association Board, the Woodlands Community Association Board, Commercial Properties Board, and as I recall, Shenandoah got to pick a board member, and Oak Ridge North. So it was a board that not only reflected the Woodlands itself, but also surrounding communities, because we realized that the town center area of the Woodlands would be an economic engine that would provide benefits not only to the Woodlands proper, but to our surrounding neighbor communities such as Shenandoah and Oak Ridge North. The Town Center Improvement District did several projects. The one I'm most familiar with is the Convention Center know now as the Woodlands Waterway Marriott Hotel and Convention Center. I represented the TCID, Town Center Improvement District, in that transaction. And basically what happened is the TCID sold bonds in the public market to finance the construction of the convention center portion of that facility. Then one of the Woodlands Corporation subsidiaries built the hotel and the convention center as one integrated structure. And then we went out and hired Marriott to manage both the hotel and the convention center as a single property. And although those of us who were involved in creating the convention center at the time were very concerned if the thing would be a success, happily to report that, of course, it has been a huge success. And the Marriott hotel portion, I think, is every year at the top of the Marriott category in which that hotel is located. So it would turn out to be a big win-win for the Woodlands. Now, if you all recall, in about 1976, we got a big annexation scare. It wasn't the Woodlands being annexed, but Kingwood was annexed literally overnight by the city of Houston. Now, Kingwood, interestingly enough, was a joint venture of the King Ranch and Friendswood Development. They purchased land over on Highway 59, and 14,000 acres they purchased and developed it into a multi-purpose residential commercial development. But the land was located within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Houston. And at that time, 1996, when the annexation occurred, Texas law allowed a home rule city like Houston to reach out and annex land within its extraterritorial jurisdiction without first getting the consent of the people in the area to be annexed. And that's exactly what they did with Houston did with Kingwood, and annexed its 43,000 people. And needless to say, the residents of Kingwood were not happy. They sued Houston and lost because under Texas law at that time, Houston was acting within the boundaries within the provisions of the legal statutes. And of course, that clued in the Woodlands that we didn't want to be the next victim of the same fate, annexation literally overnight by the city of Houston. So the TCID was used to craft a response to this annexation issue. And 2007 was a big year for crafting the response. It began by the TCID, Town Center Improvement District, and Houston entering into what's called a regional participation agreement. And basically, TCID agreed to provide $45 million over 30 years to jointly fund regional public works projects with Houston. And in consideration for that money, Houston agreed not to take any action to annex the Woodlands for 50 years, which turned out to be 2057. Now, the agreement was not that the Houston would annex the Woodlands in 2057 or 2058. The agreement was that Houston would not take any action to annex the Woodlands until 2057. So basically, it preserved the status quo of the Woodlands being located in unincorporated portions of two counties and within the ETJ of Houston until 2057. And similar regional participation agreement was entered into with the city of Conroe, and these RPAs were blessed by the legislature in Senate Bill 1012. All right, next thing that happened in 2007, the legislation that created Town Center Improvement District back in 1993 was amended. The name of TCID was changed to the Woodlands Township. Its board, as you remember, had 11 members appointed by various entities in and around the Woodlands. That board was reduced to 7 members to be elected by the voters in the Woodlands. The jurisdiction of TCID was increased to cover the entire area of the Woodlands. And plus, the new Woodlands Township was granted additional powers. And this legislation was approved by the legislature and then approved by the voters of the Woodlands in a special election. So now we have Town Center Improvement District becoming the Woodlands Township. The next step in this process that occurred in 2007 is the Woodlands Township and the community associations. That would be Woodlands Community Association, the Woodlands Association, and the Commercial Properties Association entered into a transition agreement. And basically, the community associations conveyed all the property they owned to the township. The township assumed all the liabilities of the community associations. The community associations assigned all rights and obligations under the covenants to the township, including the obligation to enforce the covenants. And all employees of the Woodlands Community Service Corporation became employees of the township. So the township basically overnight had a very experienced staff to continue its work to provide services to the Woodlands. And this was all effective on January 1, 2010. And the major changes were, of course, the township replaced the community associations, which were ultimately dissolved as Texas nonprofit corporations. And we traded our non-deductible, for income tax purposes, assessment levied by the 3 community associations into a real property tax levied by the township, which you could deduct when figuring your income tax. It's interesting to note that when the township was created out of TCID, there was really no thought of incorporating the Woodlands itself, and that the Woodlands Township was not created as a vehicle for incorporation. It was created more as a vehicle to take over the duties of the community associations and to give us a deductible real property tax in place of the non-deductible assessments. As I mentioned before, the Woodlands Township is a special purpose district. And so you have to go look at what we call the township enabling legislation to figure out what powers the township has. And this legislation has been amended over the years, and you can get a copy of it off the Woodlands Township website. So that's one source of power and authority to the Woodlands Township. The other source of power and authority are the Woodlands covenants, most particularly the right and obligation to enforce the covenants. That was another power granted to the Woodlands or obtained by the Woodlands Township when it in effect merged with the community associations. Now we have a fairly interesting list of entities which actually provide governmental services to the Woodlands Township. You have, of course, the Woodlands Township. Then you have municipal utility districts, more special purpose districts, farm to provide water and wastewater services. You have Montgomery County, Harris County. You've got Montgomery County Commissioners 2, 3, and 4, Harris County Commissioner 4, and the developer, now known as the Woodlands Land Development Company. These entities all provide various governmental services to the Woodlands Township, and we'll go through each one and talk briefly about what they do and how they are financed. First of all, the township itself, and we've been through this, they take care of covenant administration enforcement. They take care of all our paths and parkways and swimming pools. Through the Woodlands Fire Department, they provide us with fire protection and EMS services. Through contracts, they provide us with garbage, recycling, and environmental services. Through a contract with Montgomery County and a separate contract with Harris County, we get enhanced law enforcement in the Woodlands. and security. And the Woodlands Township also handles a Convention and Tourist Bureau, basically marketing the Woodlands to the outside world. And these are the same services provided by the community associations, were basically taken over by the township. The only service not provided by the community associations was the Convention and Tourist Bureau and marketing, and that was provided by TCID. So basically, the township replaced the community associations and has continued to act as the Woodlands associations, or the community associations acted in terms of the services they're providing us. Now we have all these municipal utility districts. You've got a number of MUDs that provide water and wastewater services to the Woodlands. Each MUD has its own board of directors elected by the voters who live in the MUD. And the MUD has a centralized staff and operate as Woodlands Water. Now each MUD is funded by real property taxes paid by property owners who own property in each MUD. So each MUD has its separate source of funding. Now, a few of these MUDs have no debt at all. Others have debt that they're going to have to pay off, and will be paid off only by the property owners in the MUD with the debt. Okay, where do the county commissioners come in? The county commissioners maintain the roads in the Woodlands. The only exception being State Highway 242, which is a state highway, and the state maintains that. So these county commissioners, precincts 1, 2, 3, and 4 in Montgomery County and precinct 4 in Harris County, which covers only Creekside, have to maintain our roads and replace them when they wear out. Now, interestingly, the funding for road maintenance and replacement does not come from just the residents of the Woodlands, but it comes from property tax paid by all property owners in Montgomery and Harris counties. So the Woodlands residents, the Woodlands property owners, are not the only taxpayers who get to pay for maintenance and replacement of roads in the Woodlands. Now, Montgomery County provides us services. You've got basic law enforcement, and we'll talk in a little more detail about that in a minute. They provide us with our libraries, the community center. They provide us with platting rules and regulations. They have a building permit department, fire code inspections, where you get a certificate of compliance if your structure meets the fire code. And then Montgomery County has a few ordinances which apply in the Woodlands. Counties do not have general ordinance making power. They can only make those ordinances which the Texas legislature gives them the authority to make. But in Montgomery County, we've got ordinances dealing with alcoholic beverage sales, cell phone usage, and school zones, a juvenile curfew. That was something I did not know about. And then an ordinance about where you can place sexually orientated businesses in relationship to schools, churches, child care facilities, etc. And all of these services are funded by all property owners in Montgomery County through a property tax. They are not paid for just by property owners in the Woodlands. In Harris County, basically the same thing as Montgomery County, but restricted to Creekside, which is the only village within Harris County. So that's, we get these types of services in the Harris County portion of the Woodlands. And again, the residents of Creekside, property owners in Creekside, are not the only ones who pay for these services. Instead, all property owners in Harris County pay for these services, or help pay for these services, through property tax. And the Woodlands Land Development Company, LP, the developer. They provide us services which they pay for. You remember we talked about the architectural review committees, plan review committees created by the covenants. Well, two of those committees, the Community Standards Committee and the Development Review Committee, which deal with new commercial construction and enforcement of covenants on commercial properties, are funded by the Woodlands Land Development Company, their activities. And their boards are controlled by appointees from the Woodlands Land Development Company. Okay, let's talk a bit about policing in the Woodlands, because that's a big item in the budget every year. The township enabling legislation does not allow the township to have its own police force, but the legislation does say that the township can contract with local law enforcement agencies for policing. And the Woodlands, the community associations originally, and now the Woodlands Township, have been contracting with Montgomery County for additional policing in the Woodlands for many years. I think it may stretch back to the 1980s. I do know that when I was on the WCA board in 2005, Chief Jimmy Dotson reviewed the then existing contract with Montgomery County and recommended some changes to improve the contract for the Woodlands. The current contract, under that current contract, we get 19 what they call direct law enforcement personnel are assigned to the Woodlands, again, except Creekside Park, which is in Harris County. And these 11 direct law enforcement personnel are paid for by the county. Their salaries, vehicles, retirement benefits, hospitalization paid for by the county. And these are the law enforcement personnel that we would have unless we had a contract with the county for more law enforcement personnel. The next aspect of the current Montgomery County Enhanced Policing Contract, we get 92 county commission personnel are assigned to the Woodlands. And these 92 people are paid for by the township based on salary and compensation costs. In other words, we pay the salary, retirement benefits, hospitalization, the whole benefit package plus salary to these law enforcement personnel. And they are assigned to work in the Woodlands division of the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. And the township also pays for all the vehicles for these personnel. The contract is a little bit different with Harris County. The contract provides a sergeant and 11 deputies are assigned to Creekside Park, and the township pays 100% of their salaries, benefits, vacation, sick leave, etc. So the township ends up paying total compensation for 92 law enforcement personnel for Montgomery County portion of the Woodlands and 12 law enforcement personnel for the Harris County component of the Woodlands. And note, the township doesn't pay any part of the administrative overhead related to these law enforcement personnel. We don't pay a portion of the sheriff's compensation package, any assistance to the sheriff, any buildings. We don't pay for any buildings that the sheriff may utilize. We don't pay, except through our county property tax, for the jail facilities at Conroe. We're not charged an extra amount under this policing contract. Another nice little benefit is the township would have no liability for damages awarded parties who sue alleging police misconduct, because the township does not employ any of these police officers. We're merely under contract with the county to be provided 92 police officers. We also don't have to pay the liability insurance premium to cover these awards. As you know, some pretty significant awards have been entered, not in Texas, And we really have had no problems alleged to have occurred with respect to our Montgomery County Sheriff's Department. It's always acted very professionally. But if the time ever came when Montgomery County personnel were sued for some alleged misconduct, the responsibility of defending the suit and paying any damages would be the county's responsibility, not the Woodlands Township responsibility. Now I'm talking about, of course, one of those 92 police officers that are assigned to the Woodlands Division. So why is the township a success story? Principally because it works. We get excellent services at a very low tax rate. And I pulled up some of the current tax rates to show you what I mean. Shenandoah is the big winner with what, 18 cents per $100 valuation. I think mainly because there's so much commercial property in Shenandoah. The Woodlands Township comes in number 2 on this chart at 0.2231 cents per $100. Then you got Conroe at 0.4375, Round Rock, which is often compared to the Woodlands in terms of population size, 43.9, Katy 48, Oak Ridge North 0.49, and Houston at 0.5679. So as you can see, we're paying a pretty low property tax rate for an excellent set of services. The other reason why it works so well for us that we don't really pay for the full cost of government in the Woodlands. As I mentioned, Montgomery County and Harris County taxpayers pay for all road maintenance and replacement. And the Woodlands residents pay part of that cost through their county property tax, but do not have to pay the full load. Another advantage of the Woodlands Township is it is limited government. Township only has the authority granted by the legislature and the covenants, and that's it. It doesn't have the ability, as many home rule cities do, to do just about anything they want to. If you want to find out if the township, or if the township wants to find out if it can do something, it's got to go look at the enabling legislation and look at the covenants to see if they can find authority in those two places. And really it's a success because we get so much more voter control. Woodlands voters elect the township board. Montgomery and Harris County voters, of which residents of the Woodlands are a part, elect the sheriff. People who live within the jurisdiction of the various MUDs elect the MUD boards. Voters in Montgomery County and voters in Harris County, of whom the Woodlands voters are a part, elect the various county commissioners that provide us services. So we've got the ability, if we needed to use it, to throw the bums out if that ever became necessary. Luckily, it hasn't been, and things have worked, in my judgment, very well. But voters do have that control, and it is there to be used if necessary. Well, that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much. Just a word about Township Future, Join Together for Our Community. We're a group that is dedicated to the Woodlands, dedicated to creating workable solutions to problems in the Woodlands, dedicating to cooperation and compromise. And we encourage everybody to visit our website and donate if you're so inclined. All right, Ted, I'm giving it back to you.
A couple of questions did come in, and I want to just read those, and so you can kind of answer those. You mentioned covenants several times in the presentation, and back in when you were talking about the initial structure, the governance structure of the Woodlands, you talked about covenants. And so the question is, what does it mean to say the covenants run with the land?
Well, that means that the covenants, the declaration of covenants, are recorded in the real property records of the county in which the land is located. And forevermore, those covenants are on that piece of property. you can change, ownership 100 times, and every owner buys property subject to those covenants. The only way that the covenants can be removed is if there is a termination provision in the declaration that created the covenants, and you go to that termination provision and see what you have to do to dissolve the covenants, to get rid of them. I don't know about the Woodlands covenants, if the termination provision says, but I do know to amend the Woodlands covenants, you have to have a vote of 2/3 of everybody in the Woodlands to amend, backtrack. The covenants each cover a certain portion of the Woodlands. So to amend, for example, the WCA covenants, you'd have to have everybody, a majority of the voters living in what we call WCA land, that portion of the Woodlands subject to the WCA covenants, to approve an amendment. So extremely hard to amend, and I would assume the termination provision is equally onerous.
So the covenants run with the land through various ownerships of the property. Does it also run with the land through various forms of governance?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The Woodlands could become, the Woodlands Township, the fact that we've converted to a township does not affect the viability, the enforceability of the covenants. And likewise, if we incorporated, the covenants would continue on unmolested by the fact that we were now a corporation.
Gotcha. Very good. Thanks.
Incorporated state.
So another question has to do with you talked about the various entities, and the question is basically the biggest chunk of property taxes goes to schools. So is the school district a separate governmental entity?
Yes, it is another form of special district. And it's independent of cities and counties. It was the independent school districts were created by the legislature and endowed with certain limited powers, mainly to run schools, and they have the right to impose property taxes. The people who live within the jurisdiction of the school district, they can float bonds to build new schools and then use the property tax to retire the bonds. So yes, they're another type of special purpose district.
All right. You mentioned about the regional participation agreements, but you mostly talked about Houston. A question came in. It says, could the Woodlands agree to be annexed by Conroe?
Well, a part of the Woodlands could be. A part of the Woodlands is within the ETJ of Conroe. I'm not sure how far that comes down, but a sliver of the Woodlands is in Conroe's ETJ. So, fast forward to 2058, the moratoriums on annexation are now over with. The people that live in the ETJ of Conroe, that's part of the Woodlands Township, could go to the city council of Conroe and say, please annex us. And provided the city of Conroe complied with Texas law at that time, there'd probably be a vote of the people that live within the ETJ of Conroe, and if they approved annexation, then Conroe could annex that area. But Conroe could not annex any area that's within the Houston's ETJ, which is, far and away the bulk of the area within the township.
And I think that might be the heart of the question is, would the Woodlands have a choice to either be annexed by Conroe or by Houston? And I might be reading between the lines there, but maybe that was what the question was, was getting to, whether or not the Woodlands had the choice.
Well, really, no. I mean, it's because only the area covered by Conroe's ETJ could be annexed by Conroe, provided they, jump through all the hoops. And likewise, only the area within Houston's ETJ could be annexed by Houston.
Okay, very good. I think this is just a very general question. The viewer says, I missed the first presentation, History of the Woodlands. Is it available for viewing? Yes, that is on our website, and I think we might have it linked to our Facebook page, although I'm not 100% sure about that. But what we're trying to do with all of our speaker series presentations is to get those recorded and kind of get them cleaned up a little bit so that we don't have all of our glitches in there, and then post them for your viewing so that the residents and people can see later on. So thank you for that question. Yes, if you go to township.org, you should be able to see that presentation. Another question says, at some point, can we have a speaker on how MUDs work and board members are elected? Yes, excellent question and suggestion. And this is why we do this. So you can come to us and kind of tell us what's on your mind, and hopefully we can get those individuals together and come and do a presentation that's of interest to you. So thank you for that question, and we will check into the MUD directors. I'm just going to read this one, Walter. I didn't scan it first. So it says, first, thank you for holding these sessions. Very informative. You have shared the great things about the current structure. What would be the benefits to incorporating?
Well, I guess I have to first give a disclaimer that Township Future has taken no position on incorporation. My personal opinion is there would be no benefit, but that's just me.
And I'm sure there are others who would have an opposing opinion of that. And as Walter said, it's not our intention during these presentations to take a stance as to whether we are for or in favor of, or for or against incorporation at this point. What we are trying to do is just bring the facts to the surface so that the residents can get all of the facts that they would need, that are not slanted in any way, but we just want to put the facts out there and let the residents make the decision. And here's a question, says, to change covenants, is it the majority of those who vote or the arithmetic majority of residents? So is it the majority of the voters or just the total majority of the residents?
Well, it's not a majority, it's 2/3 of, well, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I think it's 2/3 of the voters. Yeah, I mean, the terminology gets kind of not weird, but everybody who owns property in the Woodlands was a member of one of these property owners association, and every member had a vote. And so I think, and I'll have to go look at the declaration, make sure, and I'll do that, and we'll post the correct answer if I'm telling you a lie, but I think it's 2/3 of the members.
The residents themselves,
voters, yeah, 2/3 of the residents of the area covered by the covenants.
Right, not 2/3 of the people who go to the polls that day to vote.
No.
Right. Okay. So let me go on to another question. You stated the MUD board directors had to live in their district. Is that correct, or can board of directors simply own property in their district? Also, is that the same for county commissioners? And I think what you stated, Walter, was that the board members were elected by people who live in their district, not necessarily that the board members themselves live in the district. So can you clarify that?
That's correct. It's the voters in the district that elect the board members. I frankly don't know if board members have to live in the MUD district and whether county commissioners have to live in the precinct they're running for. That's an answer we'll have to post later.
Okay, we'll certainly get that clarified for you. Here's another question, says, does the 2057 annexation deadline mean that we cannot be approached or vote for an annexation before then?
Yes.
So yes, meaning that they can be approached or cannot be approached?
Oh, I'm sorry. No. Well, the present Texas annexation law requires the city to, before it can actually, annex, to come up with I think they call it a service plan, explaining to the residents of the area to be annexed, how wonderful it will be to be part of the city. I mean, what are we going to give you? What's the police protection? Are we going to provide you water, wastewater? And so I would think that if Houston was really interested in annexing us in 2057, come 2055, 2056, they would start preparing this plan, but they couldn't present the plan for a vote until after 2057, after the moratorium expires.
Okay, I think that
they could certainly get ready if that was their intent.
I think that
prior to 2057.
All right, thank you. One more question. It says, how much would township residents' county taxes be reduced if we were to incorporate?
Zero. You'd get no savings on your county taxes.
Then I guess a follow-up to, then why were we doing the various studies until last year? I guess she means, why weren't we doing the studies until last year? Why didn't we come upon all the incorporation studies up to that point?
I can't answer that question. I wasn't involved in any of that.
Yeah,
I
no
have
doubt.
no-
But all that will come out. I mean, that will come to light as we go through the process. Well, we have no other questions at this time. So Walter, thank you so much for your presentation. You were very thorough and we really appreciate you taking the time tonight. I know as you described it, it kind of got down into the weeds a little bit, but that's what we need. We are a unique community that brings so much value to the residents. And sometimes it's a little challenging to understand all the overlapping components and all the cogs that have to turn at the same time. So thank you for taking us through that. And thank you all very much for attending tonight. We really appreciate you being with us tonight. We hope that you would follow us on townshipfuture.org and also on Facebook, Township Future. So thanks again. We could certainly use your support in the future, and we look forward to seeing you next month, where our presentation will be on the businesses in the Woodlands and how the businesses affect the community and vice versa. Our speakers will be Gil Staley and JJ Holly. So more to come on that. We want to wrap up now. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And Walter, if you'll take us out of here, we're going to say good night.
All right. Thank you all for attending.